Hey everybody, hope you've all had a great start to the week, and we're super excited to be back with the fourth episode of the Save Us podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and we think we have a really cool one for today, so can't wait to jump into it. If this is your first time checking out an episode, the Save Us podcast is brought to you by the team at Planterra. Planterra specializes in organic and recycled fashion items, and you can access our catalog at planterra.store. The great part about shopping at Planterra is that we also donate 10% of each order to an environmental charity that customers get to choose at checkout. So you don't want to miss out on some of our hottest new collections, so visit planterra.store today. Also, if you missed our last episode, we talked about something that I suspect is pretty important to you, and everyone for that matter. We explored the planet's water crisis, and also how it's currently affecting people and cities all over the world. We also addressed the way climate change is continuously accelerating this crisis, and closed off with case studies on cities like Johannesburg and companies like Just Water, who are both navigating through the crisis with efficient water use. Overall, we think it was an amazing episode, and we really tried to tackle the crisis from every angle, so strongly urge you all to give it a listen after this one. Perfect. Now, I know you all do not like to be kept waiting, so let's talk about the Amazon. We all know about the Brazilian rainforest, but I think many of us underestimate how important it really is to our civilization, and at the same time, how fast it's being exploited and damaged. Well, why exactly is the Amazon so important? It's commonly understood that trees remove carbon dioxide, or CO2, from the atmosphere and absorb it for photosynthesis. This energy-creating process essentially separates the CO2 molecule, releasing oxygen back into the air and keeping the carbon to help the plants grow. I'm sure we also already know that humans have been releasing exorbitant levels of carbon dioxide, among other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, which is a leading cause of global warming. Taking a look at the numbers, and bear in mind this is just for carbon dioxide, there were 9.35 million tons in emissions in 1750 compared to now 36.4 billion in 2019. It would take 4,000 years of the 1750 level emissions to get to how much we now produce in just a year. Even just since 1970, CO2 emissions have increased by about 90%. The air also now has over 400 parts per million of CO2 compared to pre-industrial levels of 280, which is the first time the planet's reached that number in millions of years. And on top of that, we're on track to hit 500 ppm within the next 50 years. The big takeaway here is that the air is horrible and getting worse, but trees seem to help. Well, the Amazon happens to be the world's largest rainforest, spanning more than 2 million square miles and over 400 billion trees. It's also one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world, home to 30% of the world's animal species, 10% of its biodiversity, and over 40,000 species of plants. The rainforest plays an extremely important role in regulating the planet's oxygen and carbon cycles, producing roughly 6% of the world's oxygen, and it has long been thought of as a carbon sink, given it readily absorbs large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It even affects global climates, as precipitation in its rivers flow directly into the ocean, maintaining currents, and Amazon rainfall affects South America and large parts of North America's climate as well. Unfortunately, though, the Amazon may not always be the beautiful and diverse rainforest it is. Deforestation reached a record for the month of May this year, as a total of 1,180 square kilometers of the Amazon was lost, which represents a 41% increase compared to the same month in 2020. It was also the third straight month in which such a record was set as well. From August 2019 to July 2020, 9,200 square kilometers were lost, which is an area the size of Puerto Rico and a 34% increase over the previous year. On top of that, the Amazon region has been hit by thousands of forest fires, which break out every single year, often accidentally during the dry months of September and October, but satellite images show that many of these fires are unfortunately also deliberately started. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has made commitments to protect the rainforest and even pledged to eliminate Brazil's illegal deforestation by 2030, which is actually 10 years ahead of target. But at the same time, he's been known to call NGOs trying to protect the jungle a cancer, has constantly promoted commercialization of the Amazon, and having spent years dismantling policies controlling deforestation, it's ultimately unclear where his loyalties really lie. These fires, like the deforestation, also are getting worse, as there's been a 61% rise in hotspots in the last year and 13% increase in fires over the first 9 months of 2020 compared to 2019. 23% of the rainforest's wetlands have already been burned. Fires are especially problematic, as remember how we talked about trees separating CO2, releasing the oxygen and keeping the carbon for themselves? Well, as you can imagine, the carbon doesn't just disappear, but rather when the trees burn during fires, it gets released back into the atmosphere. So these large forest fires aren't just causing damage by permanently burning down the trees, but they're also, at the same time, further poisoning the atmosphere. Well, deforestation and intentional forest fires sound bad, but surely there must be a good reason for people to cause damage to 6% of our oxygen supply. What commercial industries think they're that important to be able to harm the planet to this extent? Beef and soy are two of the main culprits here. Domestic and international demand for beef and leather has fueled its takeover of the Amazon, with a 200% increase in cattle herd size from 1993 to 2013 to now 60 million cows. Meat producers often violate government policy and buy cattle that have been raised in areas linked to deforestation. The presidents of JBS, the world's largest meat company, were actually arrested for this very reason of sourcing cattle from protected areas. In terms of soy, you may remember us briefly touching on this a few weeks ago during our dairy alternative episode. Cargill and Bunge are two of the biggest players here. Cargill being the world's largest food and agriculture company and supplier to restaurants like McDonald's. Cargill is the largest trader of soy from Brazil, and many of their suppliers are clearly linked to deforestation and refuse to discontinue relationships with these suppliers. They also continuously resist efforts to expand industry-wide platforms for monitoring and policing deforestation in South America. Now, in terms of the companies you've actually heard of that are part of this problem, Walmart, Costco, McDonald's, Burger King, Mars, Danone, Cisco, and Nestle are just some of the many companies that use these suppliers for soy and beef and therefore contribute to the damage to the Amazon. This is all despite making commitments in 2015 to remove deforestation from supply chains, without now having any delivery on these commitments and less than a year left before the deadline. I'm sure none of us are fans of these corporations, but surely there are some companies playing the role of the good guy here and actually trying to protect the Amazon. This week's profile is about a company called Tentree. They're a Canadian clothing brand who donate 10 trees for every dollar spent at their store. They've donated over 57 million trees so far, mainly in Indonesia, Peru, Madagascar, and Canada. Though they don't actually plant in the Amazon specifically, we discussed the importance of trees in absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, and 57 million trees is no small feat. As a certified B Corp, they do more than just plant trees. They also use exclusively sustainable materials in their clothing, like recycled polyester and organic cotton, and have also replaced nearly all single-use plastic packaging, which reduces water use, waste, and CO2 emissions. Another company similar to Tentree is actually us at Plantera. Like Tentree, we use all sustainable materials in our clothing with similar either organic or recycled materials. Furthermore, instead of 10 trees for every dollar spent, we donate 10% of all orders to different organizations. Some of these organizations focus specifically on sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, like carbonfund.org, while others, like the World Wildlife Fund and the Coalition for Natural Rainforests, specifically protect rainforests globally from being destroyed, including the Amazon. We recommend you all check out both Tentree.ca and Plantera.store to see what both companies are doing to protect the planet and what you can do to help. With that said, let's get to our main takeaways for today's episode. The carbon in our atmosphere is at an all-time high, which spells danger for our planet and every one of us. Trees are one of the few foolproof methods of absorbing this carbon out of the atmosphere. Next, the Amazon is responsible for 6% of global oxygen and 10% of biodiversity. And yet, commercial use from industries like beef and soy have caused extreme deforestation and even some intentional fires. Finally, there are different organizations doing their part to help the carbon problem, from local Brazilian groups to global charities and even Canadian clothing companies like Tentree and Plantera. Awesome. So that marks the end of this episode. As always, it's been a lot of fun learning about this topic, and we hope everyone listening was able to take something away from this as well. We'll be back in a week with our next episode, so see you then. In the meantime, remember to do what you can to save the planet and save us.